So bigger is more. So this is trustworthy.
Oh, we need the response package.
Pretty trustworthy.
I don't think we did a good enough job explaining homework.
Yeah, actually, we asked professors so we can have the person in after.
I don't think so. I didn't say that. I thought mine was
Oh yeah. I actually spent about another 20 minutes also, but it took me a while to get to start like this.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Yeah, and then I did it while I was walking.
You'll read it wherever you read it.
I totally forgot about it.
Yeah, let's
So how many have we Okay. That's what I'm doing work for. I find that the people who run New York are pretty competent. They have a competent.
people are really stuck. They basically doing assignments so they really can't get along if they can find something. Okay, so okay, why don't we talk about that? We'll have back.
I'm gonna need to plug in mine.
Oh, you're going to okay, we're going to
Oh yeah,
this business has to do good for society.
I know. That's the kind of the tricky part. I put that
Okay, I think we're ready to pick up again. We begin with a quick word from our sponsor, from our head GSI.
Okay, so most of you have filled out the survey that was in the email that told you where to go to class today. For those of you who haven't, you have until midnight tonight because that's how you're going to get access to your homework, which is on here. After you guys fill that out, we're going to create individual accounts for each of you. You're going to come to the homework page on sensibilityandscience.com, put in your SID and your password. Then when you go in, you'll see what the homework is for today, or we'll do Thursday. You can fill in your response here and just submit, and that'll get emailed directly to us. Your reading will be under Reader. So for Thursday, which is week 1, day 2, it'll be please read Nagel and objectivity, and it'll come up like that. And this is four pages? Yeah. And most of your paragraph responses are completion-based. We don't mind if you write something wrong as long as you show that you thought about it. So if you write 2 sentences, we won't give you full credit, but if you write a couple sentences, probably a paragraph, and you show that you really read the material and you thought about it, you'll get full credit for just about every homework. Any questions?
Did you want to show them where the question is for the?
Yeah, it's in the homework. How do you?
On the homework side.
My mouse is gone.
And the credit is very simplified. It's like 0, 1, or 2, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so 2 is completed, 1 is wrote 1 sentence, 0 didn't do it.
If you're late, it's an automatic 0, by the way. So try to, and it's due an hour before class every time. Regarding the account information, it's not being generated automatically, so get your survey, fill out your survey by midnight tonight, or else you might not be finished the homework in time. Yeah.
So 51 of you have done this already, so don't worry about it. The other 20-something or so, do it immediately, please. Any more questions? Okay, back to your regularly scheduled programming.
Okay, so many of you have filled out this survey. Did it take a long time, incidentally? No, really. It is long, but it's very, very helpful. And I've only just looked at the current summary this morning very quickly. And there are just some quick points of interest. And then actually, what I would like to do, since we're kind of getting to know each other, is ask you a set of questions that go deeper into what the thinking is behind some of what you guys said on the survey. Let me just say something about it. In the first section, you will be asked things like, which kinds of science do you think are trustworthy, knowledgeable, useful? And just in a quick look, my impression is that this year, the physical sciences do slightly worse than they did last year, and the medical and biological sciences do slightly better than they did last year. I don't exactly know whether that's the influence of Robin Saul or what the explanation is for that. But see, you can see here for physical sciences, the further down means more trustworthy, more knowledgeable, generally better. So you can see everyone thinks the physical sciences get a 4. Maybe not a 5 quite so much, but certainly a 4. As we move on, environmental sciences, trustworthy, knowledgeable, trustworthy, do just as well as physical sciences, which is not how it happened last year. Just as trustworthy and so on. This is just a quick quiz through. We will come back.
By the way, if you can't read this, John is the only one who can read this.
Yeah. It's not your eyesight. I will try and get the format better for next time. It took me long enough to get it on PowerPoint, actually. What you see is that people actually trust and think are knowledgeable the sciences pretty well until we get to psychology, which for trustworthy gets a 5 from 0. Really a striking remark. I guess this is your task for the semester, Rob. Let's see. But the thing I want to focus on today is the next section, actually, where people were talking about policy issues and how science should be input into these practical policy questions. So you were asked, would you consult a scientist, and would you be willing to turn the decision over to a scientist? And usually, the significant majority, the dark bit here, is people saying, yes, I'd consult a science. The lighter bit here is people saying, no, I wouldn't consult a scientist. And this actually is pretty striking to me anyhow, because although it's a minority that say on environmental, global warming and so on, the majority say I would consult a scientist. There's a significant minority that says I wouldn't consult a scientist on environmental change. And I'm genuinely puzzled about that. I mean, I wouldn't even talk to them. Of course, we don't know who said what, but it would be nice to know if you could articulate that, because I'm genuinely puzzled about that. But there is a pattern that comes up in many of the answers here, which is people say, would you consult, like on should Darwinian evolution be taught in public science classes? Would you consult with a scientist? A majority say yes. Would you turn it over to a scientist? The majority say no. Right? And again, on our embryonic cell research, would I consult with a scientist? Big majority say yes. Would you turn it over to a scientist? Big majority say no. And that goes on again and again. And I think I can, on one relatively superficial level, I can understand that. But I would really like to go a bit further into this. This pattern goes on. It's not always the case, but then around gun laws, would you consult with a scientist on gun laws? Would you turn it yes? Would you turn it over to a scientist on gun laws? Big majority say no. So I just wonder really what people are thinking. Let me, okay, there's a lot of the poll that we will come back to in further weeks, but let's see this thing. I'll consult with a scientist, yes, but turn it over to a scientist, that's a further question. Now, first of all, we weren't very explicit about what we meant by turn it over to a scientist, but I guess what we were thinking was something like the FDA, where you've got some peculiar new chemical coming out, and you want to know if it should be sold over the counter or a prescription only or what, and you say, well, I have no idea, let the FDA look after that. Now, the FDA is still fundamentally under democratic control, right? It's still, we are still in charge of the FDA ultimately, but there's some sense in which we've turned it over to the FDA. But if you don't turn it over to a scientist, then what are you thinking? I mean, who are you going to turn it over to? The voters in Kansas? I mean, who's better than the scientists? This is, why are you not going to turn it over to a scientist? It's puzzling enough if you wouldn't even consult, but it's also very puzzling if you wouldn't turn it over to a scientist.
Well, I would just like to point out that turning it over to a scientist suggests that you're just turning it over to one scientist.
Oh, right.
Whereas if you had
Yes.
worded the question as turned over to scientists in general, then perhaps you would be like, oh yes, of course.
Oh, that's very illuminating.
We met
Okay.
Saul.
Okay, that really helps. I actually, there's an important point that I'll come on to in a second, that very often groups of people can make better decisions than any one individually. Yeah, it's not that, you needn't be relying on any one of the scientists to be particularly brilliant, it's just that if you talk it over, they're going to be better than you would if one of them did it alone. So someone else.
Oh, it was me, yeah. So I think that when you say turning it over to a scientist or turning it over to a group of scientists.
Yeah, I guess I had in mind like the FDA, where it's not really one scientist. You know what I mean, the FDA?
Yeah, so I think that it's a lot of times when you're saying turn it over to a group of scientists, it might be oversimplifying an issue that can't always be solved simply by science. I mean, at some point you have to introduce some subjectivity. You can't have complete objectivity when going into a decision. I mean, that's why we live in a democracy, quite frankly.
I really, every word there is golden. I really want to come back to spend a lot of time on that question. Yeah.
I have a similar idea. I just want to add to her. Like we just mentioned earlier about like the marijuana legalization process. It says it's a trade-off, which means there will definitely no like one decision obviously better than the other. Then it's up to the people to decide which trade-off do we want, which part of the thing that we value more.
Okay, I really want to pressure you guys both a little bit in this. Look, here's one scenario. This actually comes from ancient Greece. But I mean, the particular details don't, but the idea of the example does. Here's one scenario. You're out on a trip in Marin. You're out with your friends walking through Marin. There you are, nice, beautiful sunny day. Nice grassy hiking lane. And suddenly, you get these pains across your chest. You get these blinding pains across your chest, and you black out. And the next thing you know, you come to, and you can hear the siren. You are in an ambulance, and you wake up. You've come to again. You keep blacking out, but you come to again in a hospital where they're looking at an X-ray, and you can hear the junior doctors, who are the only ones on duty when you happen to come in, talking about the X-ray. And here's the issue. They can't figure out one of two things has gone wrong with your heart. If it's scenario A, then you are going to need invasive heart surgery. They are going to need to cut you open right now to keep you alive even for the next few hours. If that's what's going on, they're going to need to cut you open right now. It's awful stuff. There's going to be a significant risk of complications. On the other hand, the scenario B, they can't make it out from the X-ray. I mean, you can see that, right? I mean, you can't quite make out from the X-ray. In scenario B, all you need at the moment is medication. There are plenty of medication that will keep you going for the next 2 or 3 days if it's scenario B, and that will mean you have plenty of time to conduct further tests and monitoring. And at this point, the doctors realize that you have woken up, and they say to you, okay, what would you like to do? Here are two possibilities. If you are a big fan of democracy, like the last speakers, what you could do is, we can consult every patient, every ancillary worker, every doctor, every nurse on the staff, and we can take a vote on what to to you. Or, here's scenario B, we should get the most knowledgeable and experienced doctors to make the decision. That's a tough one, right? I mean, there's subjective elements in every decision, right? So you need democracy. Yes?
I felt like that's a different problem because for the premises for our scenario to work is that there is a trade-off. It's a trade-off that cannot be further illustrated by science. In this
Well,
part,
there's trade-offs here.
yeah, the trade-off is here, but if you're suggesting that more experienced doctors have more information on this, then we're saying science can bring us further.
That's right.
And in the scenario of marijuana legalization, science could not bring us to more information.
That's what I don't understand. That's what I don't understand. I mean, look, I'll come back to this thing. The basic point, well, let me just take a minute before you go back to your presupposition of your answer. You said, well, what's happened here? You said, well, that's different. You know, I mean, I take it what you meant is, democracy here would be insane. Yeah? I mean, we don't know each other very well at this point in the class, but I was going to take a quicker question in this because I take it that, is this right? Most of you would go for 2. Yes? I mean, just touching this. 2 seems like the sensible thing, right? But I just want to, before we go to the cases where you say, oh, but that's different, just let's reflect a bit on why 2 is the right answer here. I mean, can I take it for granted that 2 is the right answer? None of you think I'm kind of pulling the wool over your eyes or something with 2 here, yeah?
Well, no, I would ask for the most experienced doctors, but then the decision would ultimately be mine.
Okay, but that's not democratic.
Decision, right?
Right, but that's not democratic, is it?
No, it's not democratic, but it's not the same as leaving it to the doctors to make a decision.
Yeah. That's actually what I wondered about. Would you turn it over to a doctor? No. I guess I suspected that sometimes people were thinking, yeah, leave it up to me, right? But of course, that's not going to happen. That's not the way it works. But just before we move on, let's reflect on this a bit more. It seems to me, as you think, why is 2 the right answer, and why is 1 the wrong answer? Well, just let's be explicit about this. It's the quality of decision making. Right? You'll get better decision making if you ask a couple of doctors than if you ask everybody in the area just to take a vote. Right? Is that fair? Again, we don't know each other very well. I don't want to put words into your mouth. I'm just trying to articulate what I think is the obvious thing here. Yeah. The point is there is a tension between the quality of the decision making and democracy. If you want quality decision making in this medical test, then you don't want democracy. Whatever would be prompting you to pursue democracy, it is not a request for high quality decision making. Right? If someone did say, yeah, I want to vote here, that is not because they're thinking we'll get a better quality decision that way. So democracy is in tension with a requirement that the decisions about what goes on in a society, that these practical decisions should be made well. Right? That's why you're doing it. That's why you're making this choice here. But let's think this through. Is there anything, if you've got a practical question to decide, surely the only thing that matters is that the decision should be made well. I mean, if you say, well, I don't really care if we make a good decision, there's something else that really matters. I mean, in the medical case, I can imagine a democracy nut saying, I don't care about the quality of the decision as to what happens to my heart. All I care about is that we have followed a proper democratic process. Okay, I can understand that. That's coherent, right? I don't think it's a very persuasive view. But If you say, no, I'm not a democracy nut like that, I care about the quality of the decisions, then why are you going to be a Democrat? Why would you have, I mean, I said the FDA is ultimately under our control, but why would you even have that? If you want high quality practical decisions, then does democracy have any kind of authority that can overcome that? And suppose you take the legalized marijuana case. I mean, there are two. Suppose you want the best quality of decision you can get. Well, you can say this is just like the hospital case. One thing you can do is tell everyone in Kansas, tell everyone in Idaho, tell all the gang, here's what we want, here's the issue. Should we legalize it or not? Or if you want to do it statewide, let's do everyone in the state. Why are you going to think that's going to get you a high quality decision? There's absolutely no reason to think that's going to get you a high quality decision. If you want a high quality decision, what you have to do is get the most knowledgeable and experienced medics and political scientists to make the decision.
Shouldn't psychologists be in that second?
Psychologists are kind of political scientists. I use the term political scientists wrongly. As a medic. Some of you were absolutely shocked yesterday. Yes, 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
Well, doesn't it again come back to trade-offs? Like,
okay.
it's
So
a
what
hard argument to make because I think to choose one, you're saying I think that people should have some control over their own actions, even if that sacrifices the quality of decision making. So again, it's a trade-off, and I guess you could get like the most knowledgeable ethicists or whatever to go decide what the correct answer is, but how do you know that it was right to get them to decide that instead of take a vote to decide it?
So I just don't understand. You mean there's a trade-off between democracy and quality decision making?
Yes.
So you're having to trade off something against getting a good decision. I mean, what is it that you care about so much? There's in order to get a bad, that you say, okay, we'll go for it, we'll suffer a bad decision on account of getting that. What is the trade-off? That's what puzzles me.
The fact that in the future you could change the decision instead of it forever being out of your hands.
Well, but you have that. The ethicists could, or political scientists, or whoever could change their minds too. Let's be quick, because I want to get to structured, quicker questions that everyone can come in on, and group discussions that everyone can come in on. Actually, what time? Let me just check the time. Okay, I'm not going to take any more one-on-one questions. Is that all right? Except you were so outraged.
I think that's just my face, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak this long.
I think that once again it's a complete oversimplification in the sense that there is some aspect of every one of the decisions that are the premises that you've introduced that has a moral aspect to it. Morality is not a black and white thing. When people say, "Oh, hey, drugs should be illegal," or versus this drug should be illegal, a big part of it is it moral to do that? And when you're once again, it's objectivity versus subjectivity. Morality is inherently a subjective thing. If you value democracy above everything else, then you might make a different decision than somebody else.
Okay, I really want to get you guys to answer this in a more structured way. I want everyone to get input to this, and we just have very little time. So I want us to be able to have some in-class discussion, and we talked about having people in groups before, so it would be good if we could do that and hear what you think about it. You can see that it's the same structure here, right? That on the one hand, you think, well, for quality of decision, why don't ethics people make better ethical decisions than just regular people who have never thought really hard about a moral problem in their life? Or in the gun laws, why not get a high quality decision? What is so good about what's informing everyone around? And let me, just as a shaping up question, could we do this as a clicker question just to see if you guys have got clickers working? So, okay, if you haven't got a clicker, you're disenfranchised. So I guess this raises issues of its own. But can we do this in this way? Okay. suppose you consider life under a dictatorship. Now, life under a dictatorship is often pretty horrible. But it's sometimes said about China at the moment that there's an implicit bargain between the Chinese middle classes and the Chinese government, that on the one hand the government will make people's lives pretty good, and on the other hand the deal is they'll continue to make people's lives pretty good so long as nobody complains too much about the political situation. And if your life is pretty good, then really what does it matter? I mean, dictatorships have a habit of being really horrible to their political opponents. But suppose that you're dealing with a dictatorship that does stifle its political opponents, but it does it in a very humane way. So it doesn't really end up treating people any more badly than actually democracies find themselves treating the enemies of the state. I suppose that that's what's going on. Would it matter whether you live under a dictatorship or a democracy? Suppose you have a good life, you have easy access to lots of Apple products, you could raise a family, you could have a career, everything goes fine. Your individual rights are pretty well respected. Why would it matter whether you live under a dictatorship or a democracy? I've actually written this out. It looks can you just grab that and pass that around as fast as you can? This is just basically what I just said on the podcast. Can you move these around? And when you've got your copy, can you answer the question? If your life is running well, the whole economy is going well, people are fairly treated, people have good lives, does it matter whether you're under a dictatorship or a democracy? Can you click? And don't point your clickers at me.
Yeah, I think more is A.
So it's A, B, and C.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
A is 1, B is 2, and
oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. So A is 1, B is 2, and C is 3. Oh, okay.
But it's still going.
Yeah.
You can change your vote.
If we don't be influenced by everybody else.
dictatorship is great.
So we have to, yes.
So is that it? What are the numbers?
16, 12, and
16, 12, and 3.
Basically half, yes.
Just slightly half.
Half say yes, half say no, it doesn't matter, or don't know. Okay, so, yes, go quickly.
After you say yes,
Sorry?
on the sheet it says what's under situation being covered, and then on the voice it says
Yes, I'm assuming, well, I guess I was assuming in the sheet that people wouldn't say the dictatorship is better. I was assuming that you'd either think it was a difference or that the democracy was better. But you're right, I should have allowed for the possibility that people might prefer the dictatorship. Yeah. Okay, that was a blind spot. Quickly.
The sheet also says that the dictatorship is doing better for the people under democracy, whereas on the board it says if they are, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't say that one is better than the other.
So, well, the key question is, does it matter, right? I mean, the point I'm trying to get at is, what's the important thing here? Is it the quality of judgment about the way your society is run, which a dictatorship might be doing just as well as a democracy, or is it is there something about a democracy that is just kind of intrinsically good? Should we be kind of democracy nuts and say, I don't care if I get bad decisions because they're democratically made? Democracy, I just love democracy. Bad decisions, schmad decisions. I like democracy. So, look, can you get into groups of 4? Can you identify a group of 4 at this point?
It doesn't have to be perfectly 4, right?
It doesn't have to be perfect.
We'll settle with it.
At this point, you have to do some work. At this point, you have to do some real work. Because, oh, listen to me. What you have to do is get a spokesperson, and you have 5 minutes to address this question. You could argue human happiness and misery are, after all, matters of objective fact. What works for humans and what doesn't, that's perfectly scientifically studyable. It is intensively scientifically studied what makes people happy and what makes them miserable. And the best way to do that is by science. Right? There isn't a better way to find out what makes people happy, what makes them miserable, than by using science. So if you're going to make practical decisions, they should always be entirely in the hands of the relevant scientists. If there are trade-offs to be made, no one is better at assessing how to make those trade-offs than the scientists. Why would you think that a random voter somewhere deep in rural Iowa is better at making a trade-off than a scientist? So, if you want to have good decision-making in a society, you should throw out democracy as an idea. And at the moment in the US, the system's democratic in some broad sense, that practical decision-making is often in the hands of people who know little about the relevant science. But that's not defensible. It's no more defensible than an arbitrary dictatorship. If you want high-quality decision-making, you should abandon democracy and put in charge the people who understand how things work. 5 minutes.
And the spokesperson should try to make sure they capture things to respond to when we call on the spokespeople of the group. So you don't necessarily have to reflect your own point of view, but you'll be presenting, it'll be somebody else whose point of view you're telling.
I would say this film clip is going to get shown in Sacramento.
It's not just like scientific evidence. Yeah, I was going to say that like there are different questions that ask. Like the part I'm talking about you first, like you feel but like the one about that is like come back to the side. Yeah. And because of that,
That's how it works now.
One to three.
there's actually several arguments to say
I think it's better to have one about the decision. People that are like directly affected than like a small thing. They might have all these people are not as very like that side. I just think that like a lot of times like so much of if all those people I mean, I think if people like take the time to intelligent, so a lot of people might think they're psychotic but not. For example, Megan Rose. It's not technically real. They feel good. They're about that. I guess you could blackmail the scientists, you know, make the right choice to shoot your family. So exactly the utopia we described. I don't know if we should have been entirely, but I think it's certain issues. Yeah, I don't think it's really, you know, I think those are very fair. I don't think that's a good thing for the I don't know. I honestly, I don't know. I don't have. No, I'm just trying to. No. I get it, but I don't even have an answer to the last question. I'm leaning towards one side. I don't know. I disagree with the first sentence because there will always be outliers. The happiness and argument that happens with the president, and there are also a couple of happy people.
You can argue.
So the question is, shouldn't we have some kind of the Greeks originally put the kind of arguments I was putting, but in the last 10 years it's really become a big issue in political philosophy, whether we shouldn't have an epistocracy, the people who know being in charge. And I think everyone agrees that this can't be right, but no one agrees on why. So I'm really burning with curiosity. And just to be clear, it's not that I think this is right. I think the case is very powerful, but I think like many people, I'm not quite sure why. So I'm really curious to hear what you guys think. So are the groups labelled A, B, C?
No, not yet.
Aha. Okay, no, we just haven't followed this at all. You guys. You all believe it?
Oh, you're looking at us.
Yeah, I'm looking at you.
Let's see. Well, we were talking a little bit about how democracy can enable different people to pitch ideas and contribute, and then, but also the potential for like there always being a bias and a struggle for power whenever democracy is in play. My personal opinion is that it doesn't really matter too much if there is a democracy or a dictatorship, so long, because I feel like our main opposition to being in a dictatorship is that there's no room for change or upward mobility or the ability of the populace to go in and or for talent to rise from below to influence policy making. And so I think that in the case of a dictatorship that is merit-based, I would be all for it.
Okay, so democracy is not that big a deal on its own. It's good. It's often good for practical decision making. Often, in practice, you will get better decisions, but that's not guaranteed. There might be a meritocracy that gets even better.
Yeah, I would be down for like small groups making, or like small groups making.
Groups of 4, let's say.
Like if we were rulers of the world, that would be perfect. But yeah, I think like small groups of educated people that are well informed in certain areas would probably be the best at making decisions. So long as, you know, people as opportunities to join that decision-making body would be equally spread.
Okay, so you'd actually see the case for an epistocracy. Yeah. Was there anything else in the group? No? Okay. What about you guys over here? Yeah.
Well, we were talking about the difference between, what is a practical decision and what, is not. You said that, especially in this room, a lot of people here are going to think, this is a practical decision. For us, it seems reasonable. But there are a lot of people that don't really care what kind of decision is made for, the people as a whole. I would like decisions to be made, how it's going to affect me. And that's,
yes.
One of the problems you're going to have when you have a couple people that are in power. How are they going to make the decisions? How are they going to make the decisions for us as a whole? How many people are going to disagree with that? If you do have some kind of dictatorship or oligarchy where there are people in power, there are going to be plenty of people that are going to, argue against that and be like, this isn't right, and it's going to cause, possibly more problems than democracy will in terms of decision making, because there are a lot of people that are going to disagree with those decisions.
Okay, there are two different things here. One is the question whether the rulers are going to look out for you. And the other is the question whether they should be the rulers in the first place. Yeah. So the first line of thought on what you're saying is, so long as you could be sure that the rulers would look out for you, that would be just fine. Yeah. And the other line says, I don't care if they look out for me or not. How come they're in charge? You see what I mean? And that's a more radical line of thought. That says, I want democracy. I don't care about this stuff about if they look out for me. Can you clarify?
Right. Well, I guess it kind of goes back to what she was saying, that if there's a way for people, because you have to decide who knows the best on this topic.
Yeah.
There's no clear
that's the key question.
I'm the best at this. Like there's, as scientists, there are clearly many very, well-educated scientists that know that particular field very well. So being able to, like she said, work your way up and see, okay, who's going to be, the very best. This is just the way, like you have to be able to work yourself up and prove that you're the best. You can't just say, I'm the best.
Okay.
You should.
Somebody's going to judge who's the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And who's going to judge, like, who's the best judger.
Yeah. But and you think? But are you arguing that a democracy would give you the best judges?
No.
Right. Okay. Well, this is very. Okay. I'm quite surprised actually. You guys do. On the other hand.
So we discussed basically why we have a democracy, mostly for checks and balances.
Sorry, can you be a little bit louder?
Oh, okay. So we discussed why we have a democracy in terms of, like from back in history, people established it to have checks and balances on who's in power. And we also discussed how science can have errors and how democracy is kind of a supplement to that. And we also discussed some aspects of people taking blame for making certain decisions if they have a democracy. So if I'm responsible for making the decision, then I will take the blame in some aspect of like self-actualization and the value of being able to make a decision yourself. I personally think it comes to a matter of whether or not you want good or fair process versus results. Generally, people favor maybe good results, but generally a fair process guarantees a good result, but then that fair process, aka democracy, kind of negates like the perfect set of results, but it's the best we've got.
Okay, that's all very good, but I'm not. Could you be more convincing about your bottom line? I mean, I see the thing that you need to keep tabs on these scientists, right? But, I mean, that's one important point you're making. You've got to keep tabs on scientists. You can't let scientists decide for themselves what's good science and what's bad science. The rest of us have to be some kind of judge. Yeah, that's the point you're making. And one analogy you could give here is like trial by jury. Yeah, that nobody thinks that the people in a jury are especially smart or especially wise or something like that. But you just rely on kind of random common sense to be able to use expert testimony and witnesses and so on to get at the truth. And you think you're thinking of it a little bit like that. Is that a way to put it? Yeah. The only I do see that and I see that democracy is one way to get that result. But I guess I'm not sure that it's the only way. I mean, what I mean is, suppose you can find being able to vote to people who'd had a long high school education. You disenfranchise a whole bunch of people, but you could still keep tabs on the scientists. So I guess what I'm wondering is, I realise that a kind of shudder went through the class when I was explaining the case for this, but it's trying to get at the roots of that shudder. You know, is it really, I mean, why is it that it seems so horrifying to cut out whole swathes of the population? And if you say, well, it's just to keep tabs on the scientists, actually there are lots of ways of keeping tabs on the scientists. You don't have to have universal democracy for that. Another group. What about you guys? Okay, I'm sorry, let me also keep track of the time. Okay, is that okay? Are you, have you got a
so I guess the thing we're most concerned about...
sorry, let's come on to you guys next. Okay.
I think we have the same concern as everyone else in that human history shows if you give a certain group of people power, they're going to abuse it. So if there's checks and balances in place, I feel like it's better, but just we're programmed to be afraid of a few people making decisions for us, because if they make bad decisions or if they're corrupt, then we're kind of screwed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you could have the same thing in a democracy. You know, the whole nation might go wrong.
But it's
the whole nation might go bad and start beating the daylights out of some minority group. You know, that can happen.
I think historically it's less likely to happen now.
It's less likely, yeah. Okay. Yeah, you guys.
Well, we kind of talked about the use of democracy in choosing people to represent us, which is what we do anyways. So there's two different kinds. Like we talked about kind of like propositions where it's like the direct vote with the people, but then there's the voting for people who represent us. So I think there always has to be some sort of democracy in that, where the people choose who they want to represent them with their own knowledge.
Okay, so, but are you thinking, when you say represent, are you thinking of the representatives as people who know more or are wiser than the rest of us?
Yeah, who we perceive to be, have more knowledge about a subject that we don't necessarily have.
I'm realizing it sounds insane now, but I guess we're like thinking that like we could sort of, the public could decide on which scientists would get to make all the decisions.
Yes. No, I don't think that's insane. I think that's connected to the last thing about thinking of the public as really ultimately keeping tabs on the scientist. I'm not going to have time to get to everything I was thinking of doing. But here's John Stuart Mill writing in the 19th century. He said, when one person feels the other to understand the subject better than himself, when you feel someone else to understand the subject better than you, that the other's opinion should be counted for more than his own, accords with his expectations, and with the course of things which in all other affairs of life he is accustomed to acquiesce in. It is only necessary that this superior influence should be assigned on grounds which he can comprehend, and of which he can comprehend the justice. So if you say to me, look, I know about gardening better than you, I'll tell you what to do with your garden. You see what I mean? That's fine. I'll take being bossed about by you on that. So long as I can comprehend that you know better than me. You see what I mean? And I think this is saying exactly what you just said, that the general public should be able to keep tabs on scientists, because, how should I put it, rocket science isn't really rocket science. What I mean is the basic principles of science are familiar to everyone from when they were 3 or 4 years old. When kids are 3 or 4 years old, they're already actively exploring the causes of things, why things happen, how their environment works. And all that scientists are doing is an elaborate version of that same thing. So really we ought to be able to understand the general principles in which science is operating. Sorry, that's really a long-winded way of saying it, but is that catching?
I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's one of the things that should be taught at a younger age is like these basic principles, because that's obviously part of the problem with people's ignorance on subjects like this that they eventually have to vote on and be concerned about. And so I think, obviously, I completely agree that the
people should have to present their own qualifications and have to explain to the people that they're representing that this is the right choice. But at the same time, the people obviously have to understand it. So it's kind of a two-way street.
Okay, very good. Okay, one last group. I think, do we have time for one more? It would be good to take one more if we have time. Yeah. What about you guys?
Okay, so yeah, we talked a lot about some of the stuff that was brought up already, especially like we felt like the question presupposed that objective fact and science are the same thing, which isn't necessarily true because science is sometimes subjective, like there's like confirmation bias and stuff like that. And then secondly, we said that, like this group kind of just talked about, the role of science shouldn't be like top down, like making the decisions for us.
Yeah.
It should be bottom up, like informing voters. And the reason, I guess, well, some of us talked about like how like this was like only focused on like practically, like this is only focused on consequences. Like scientists probably would focus on outcomes. I think that group over there mentioned that too. Whereas like, you know, like maybe some ethicists or something would say like, no, the reason this taking away democracy makes us so uncomfortable is that because like we believe each person has like a right to autonomy, a right to decision making, and like taking that away, even if it's like practically better in principle, is like, a bad value.
Yeah. No, that's very good. Okay, we're not. This isn't going to be something we'll be explicitly discussing in every class, but it's something that's really important when you're thinking of the role in science and decision making. And so, just to be explicit, it's not that I really wish to hammer away at you to convince you that this is the correct approach. A democratic approach is fine with me. Let me be very clear about that. But I think it's also extremely important if you're going to say science should be corralled. We have to keep an eye on these guys. We have to know just where they need input from the democracy as a whole. It's very important to understand just what kind of tabs you want to keep, where you think you want to assert yourself and where not. And this is a topic that will come up many times in different forms in the class. Okay, there's another couple of questions in the handout that we haven't had time to get to, but let me encourage you to just read through them in the remaining 2 minutes. We won't have time to discuss them today. And then we'll pack up. Okay, great comments, wonderful comments, thank you.
And by the way, just as a touch of response, I should make the point.
Oh yes, I should have invited you guys too.
I think we should point out that a number of the things people have been talking about actually, I think, are really affected by the topics that we are then going to actually have entire classes on coming up. Yeah. So in some sense, it would be really interesting to have some of the same conversation again towards the end of the semester if we find a moment, because I would be interested to see whether any of these positions feel different.
Yeah. And Rob, I'm sure you'll have volume to say that you have
the beauty of it is we have a whole semester to plunge into this, so we're gonna keep coming back to these issues again from lots of different angles. So I think I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay, thank you guys.